Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and in today's episode, we talk about the Chariot Revolution and the end of the Bronze Age. The Chariot Revolution happens over a long period of time, but it happens around 2000 BC. It is the world's first superweapon. It combines horses with a platform. It is a mobile artillery platform. And it's expensive. Because it's the first superweapon, it can defeat all other weapon systems, especially infantry. But it's also incredibly expensive. It is a mobile artillery platform. For the first time, you could kill without being killed. As you run around the battlefield at 20 miles plus per hour, shooting your bow, you are fairly protected, invulnerable to the footmen who are trying to defend themselves from you. So, for the first time, you're able to move around the battlefield quickly. You're able to fire from a distance. That's artillery. And platform is literally, it's a platform. You're standing on it. You have a driver, and you have a man with a javelin and or arrows, and you have complete superiority over people on foot. Now, what the chariot shows is that these people do not have the skills to ride horses. They are not cavalry. They are not nomads. The horses are too small. They're not strong enough to carry a man. But with a combination of metallurgy, which only settled civilizations have the knowledge to do, and all of the leather working for the straps, they're able to combine the horse to this platform. But it is massively expensive. Super weapons are always massively expensive. It's like aircraft carriers today. They are only the rich could afford them. Which means only rich people matter in the military anymore. This is the weapon that now changes the definition of power, of military power. You actually see this in the Old Testament. This change. Where it goes from Joshua has 7,000 men, or however many men. It goes from a definition of men with swords or shields or spears. And then you get to like Ahab, and he's got 3,000 chariots. Like, no one cares about men anymore. No one cares about footmen, because it's chariots that matter. So only rich people matter, because only rich people have the money to do the things that are needed to do to use the chariots. First, they have to own a lot of land for the horses to graze. So you need a lot of empty land just to feed the horses. Most people don't have that kind of money to just have land and have an animal walking around on it. Second, the horses themselves are expensive and rare, since their only use is for this. The third is you have to build a wheeled chariot with an axle and have all the bronze and make it light enough that you can move. You then have to have a driver who is trained with the horses to get them to listen to his commands. You also need to have the time to be able to use a bow or javelin and hit what you're aiming for while moving at 20 miles an hour. That means you can't be a farmer, because now you have to be trained. Now, we're not yet to a professional army, but we're on our way. Because the people who are going to use chariots are going to have military training, at least individually. Now, they don't necessarily work together, and we'll talk about that when we hit the Assyrians. But at least at the individual level, like a medieval knight, they have to have personal military training. Footmen on the battlefield are in a bad place. If you ever watched the movie Gladiator from whatever it was, 2000, there's a scene where they hold a historical battle, quote unquote, in the middle of the movie, and out come a bunch of chariots. And Russell Crowe's Maximus takes command, and he makes all the guys hide in a big ball. Anybody who didn't listen to him got shot in the face. If you were a footman, a farmer dude with a spear or some sharp wooden object on a battlefield at 1750 BC, facing a bunch of chariots, you were in a bad place. You had about a 20-minute life expectancy. Footmen are destroyed. This is the new form of war, which creates an arms race. Since only rich people can afford chariots, only rich societies have enough rich people to afford a lot of chariots. And so what you get is an arms race between the big, rich places and everyone else. In fact, everyone else stops counting, and you end up with 3 big empires, which creates a balance of power. A balance of power, interestingly enough, that we will see throughout this course rebalance itself again and again and again. We'll see it in the Crusades. In History 102, we'll see it in the modern era. We'll see it with the Turks. We'll see it again and again and again. We're going to see the creation of 3 loci of power in what we call the Middle East that are still there 4,000 years later. What are those loci? Babylon, Egypt, and Asia Minor. Now, Asia Minor currently is Turkey, but it was, before it was the Turks, it was the Byzantines. Before it was the Byzantines, it was the Romans. In 2000 BC, it's the Hittites. Why? Why do you get these 3 major powers? What happens to everybody else? Well, everyone else gets ground down. They can't compete. They can't keep up. Babylon is the richest city. It has the most trade goods. It has the most manufacturing. It has the money and the knowledge to build and improve these weapon systems. The second is Egypt. Egypt has the Nile. Egypt is the richest place on earth for most of History 101. When you think Egypt, you think money, because the Nile produces an immense amount of food. And that food is then sold. So Egypt always has money, but it's money based on agriculture, whereas Babylon's money is based on trade. And then there's the Hittites. Now, the Hittites are in Asia Minor. They are in the map. If you are looking at the map in the video, it's the land of Hatti, H-A-T-T-I. It is the land of Turkey today. And they're based in the mountains of Asia Minor and on the plateau. They're based in the Tarsus Mountains and in the plateau of Asia Minor. Why does this matter? Well, Egypt and Babylon are river valleys. They don't have metals. They have giant rivers that wash all the metals away. This is why the seas are salty. Giant rivers, through erosion, erode land and mountains. Now, what they leave behind is silt and immense fertilized land. Great for farming. Mountains are terrible for farming, but the mountains have the metals. And so for the Hittites, it's cheap metals. They are poorer than Babylon and Egypt, but they're able to compete because of the lower cost. It's like Saudi Arabia and oil. Gas in Saudi Arabia is like 50 cents a gallon. Why? Because they have the oil. So they take out whatever they need. put it aside and say, this is what we need, and they sell the rest. So for them, oil is cheap because it's subsidized by all the amount that they sell. So the Hittites are the same way. They are going to sell copper and tin to Egypt, to Babylon. But they're going to keep some for themselves, and that allows their cost per chariot to be lower. And so they're able to compete with places that have more money, that are richer than they are. And so what we get is these three places. Now, these three places are going to be the center of power for the next 4,000 years. It's going to be Turkey and Egypt and Baghdad, or Ctesiphon when the Greeks owned it. So Babylon will become Ctesiphon, then become Baghdad. And when, interestingly, and we'll talk about this in a little while when we get to the Persians, when Babylon is weak, when Baghdad is weak, that loci power shifts a bit to the east to be Persia, the Iranian plateau. So in the Middle Ages, you have Iran, Egypt, and Turkey. And the Turks will eventually conquer the Arab Middle East, but never conquer Iran. And so even today, right now, you have Iran, the Turks, and Saudi Arabia / Egypt. Even in the 21st century. All competing. So this loci of power that's created between Babylon, Egypt, and the Hittites continues even today. So the situation 1000 BC, we have nomads dominating the grasslands from Hungary in Europe all the way to Western China. It's about 6,000 miles, 8,000 miles. We have settled peoples set up on huge rivers, the Nile, the Tigris to Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Indus and the Ganges, but really the Indus in India, and the Yangtze River in China. They will have walled cities, wealth, trade, knowledge, culture, writing, stories. And then we have the semi-settled people living in forest or mountain zones. They do herding. They do light farming. This is the small village life. The cities, so the nomads are a few hundred people. The cities, unless it's Babylon, which is always an exception, we're talking maybe 10,000 people or so. Whereas the semi-settled people are in the small, high hundreds to low thousands, but mostly in the maybe high hundreds, maybe 1,000 people. The nomads are a few hundred. The semi-settled people are a larger hundred to a small 1,000 or two. And then once you hit basically 5,000, you're walled cities. You're different. And so the semi-settled peoples are living in forest zones or mountain zones on these margins. They herd, they might do some light farming for mostly roots. This is the majority of Europe. This is the majority of Africa. This is central India, southern China, China south of the Yangtze. This is what we're talking about. Japan and Korea are the same way. And then the world ends. Around 1000 BC, the world ended. Just like the asteroid that struck the dinosaurs, the world ends. The Bronze Age collapse. Between 1200 or so and 1000 BC, every major civilization on Earth is destroyed. Nomads get on the move. We don't exactly know why, but I have been saying for more than a decade it has something to do with climate. It has something to do with the ecology, because nomads are looking for food. So if they're on the move, it's because they can't find food. And there's starting to be research that's starting to kind of prove that thesis. There's no history about why these people are on the move, but every nomad basically gets on the move. And when they get on the move, they hit other nomads, and they push those nomads who push other people, who push into settled zones, all looking for food. Every major city in Greece is burned except for Athens, which becomes a point of pride for Athens. They go around going, ha ha ha, well, our city was never burned. Whereas everyone else says there was nothing there worth burning. That's how poor you people were. You weren't even worth stealing from. Hatti, the Hittites, break up into pieces. Babylon is sacked. The new kingdom, Egypt, is destroyed. Waves of people enter into new zones, begin settling, burning. It is the Bronze Age collapse is the apocalypse. There are two apocalypses in this class. There is this Bronze Age collapse where all civilization ends. Every major civilization, China, India is so destroyed, India forgets it has a Bronze Age. There was no history, no archaeology. They didn't think they had a Bronze Age until the mid-20th century, when people started digging and found stuff and went, wait a minute, this is older. This is 1000 BC stuff. Did you know this was here? No, I didn't know this was here. I didn't know this was here either. We had a civilization? They didn't know. That's how just leveled it was. Like an atomic bomb went off. There was just nothing. And so every major civilization, every major city is burned around 1000 BC. The second major apocalypse is going to be in the 400s, where the three major civilizations, Han China, Mauryan India, and Latin Rome, all collapse. They fragment, they collapse, they break apart. It is not as apocalyptic as the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse is so bad, the Greeks forgot how to read and write. There are two forms of Greek, Linear A and Linear B. No one can read Linear A. The Greeks couldn't read it. They couldn't read their own language. They had to reinvent Greek. That's how dark. But if you think about the Dark Ages following the fall of Rome in Europe, you're talking the same kind of thing. Literacy in Rome goes from 50% to 5% in Europe. Now, the only educated people in 500, 600 AD in Europe, north of Rome, were the priests. There's essentially nobody else. And they're only educated because they needed to read the Bible. There's essentially nobody else. And so what we see is this simultaneous collapse of major civilizations throughout the world. And a dark age, just like in the Bronze Age collapse. There's a dark age in Babylon, in Egypt, in Europe. All right, that finishes our military political end to the Mesopotamian period. We're going to pick up next on the other side. We're going to talk about who wins the Bronze Age collapse, who recovers from this destruction. Thank you.